Just like the games have gotten bigger, so has Billy. Here's a look at the brand new NECA Toys Saw Billy the Puppet 12-inch action figure with Tricycle. Obsessed with teaching his victims the value of life, John Kramer, a deranged sadistic serial killer, abducts the morally wayward. Once captured, they must face impossible choices in a horrific game of survival. The victims must fight to win their lives back or die trying. I'm sure we have some sick games in store for us, but before we do that, and before the suffering begins, I'd like to first thank the folks over at NECA Toys that did provide this sample of the brand new Saw Billy the Puppet 12-inch action figure with Tricycle and sound that we can have a look at this review. I'm going to grab now the tape measure. Being the way that Billy is actually designed, he doesn't stand on his own. He does have articulation, but he doesn't have nearly enough of it to actually be able to stand on his own. So he always has to be on top of his bike, which is fine. This is going to be a way I'm going to be displaying the figure anyways. Back to the measuring. With Billy on top of his bike, the figure collectively stands 13 inches in height, or the figure is going to be about 33.5 centimeters tall. Some assembly was required, not to Billy though, but to the bike that he sits on top of. The bike consists of 3 parts, and as a side note, let's go ahead and just remove Billy for right now on the bike. He doesn't actually attach by peg, so it's very easy to, in fact, to remove the figure. We'll just put him down here for right now. As a side note, I wish that NECA had found a way to have the bike parts. You'll notice in the opener of the review when I did the unboxing that you literally have to rip the whole thing apart in order to remove the parts to the bike. I wish there was a way that you could have actually take the bike parts out without destroying the packaging in the process. Just in case you decide down the road that you want to put this back in the box, I'll have to then put the bike in loose. And even then, with the assembly the way that it is, there's really no way to detach the bike once everything is put together. Sure, you can easily remove the handlebars. Those were already parts separately in the pack anyways. If you look at the handlebars, they're a half circle, and they line up to the half circle inside the frame of the bike. When you are putting them in, obviously you can't face them the opposite way. That would just look silly anyways. But if you put them in, they fit fairly well. A little bike bell there to the top, but one of the audio clips, unfortunately, isn't included for Billy, is the sound of a bike bell. There's giggling, but there's no bike bell ringing. The other thing that had to be installed, of course, is the back of the bike. This whole back frame usually would have been a place that if you're playing as a kid, your friend would usually just sit on the back of it, and you'd have the luxury, more the agony of having to drag your friend around while he was holding onto your waist. I've done that actually a couple of times growing up. But like the whole back of the bike here, the tires are already built in place, so you don't have to worry about installing those. But you have to take, though, this part, and you have to take the frame of the bike and fit it through. And the way it fits through seems to be a one-time only deal, so I can't actually remove it right now. Once it fits through, you'll see that this clip, once it fits through, the clip widens, so there's really no way to remove the back of the bike. The plastic is pretty good for the bike. It's not thick, like it's not a dense enough plastic. I would worry that there could be potential of breakage, for example, especially things like where it's been attached. The thing I'm most worried about, though, is the front of the tire. Obviously, like Tricycles would be, Tricycle would have one very thin tire to the front, larger tires on the back. But with the weight of Billy all really being on the front of the bike, like I wish there was a little bit of a clip, like a ledge plastic, that the front of the tire could have sat inside to stabilize the bike when Billy sits on top of it. You'll see what I mean in a second. For movement, the bike does spin. The back tires also do spin, if I can actually touch those. The only thing that doesn't spin is the pedals. You can't move them around, so don't force them whatever you do, because they'll only ultimately break. On the back of the packaging, they actually have managed to get Billy's feet on both pedals. I can't do that, though. I can only seem to get him on one of his pedals. The one on the front, though, I can't seem to bring his legs further enough forward to actually have his feet resting at least on this pedal. You'll see what I mean in a second. So there's the Tricycle. Overall, pretty good. I still wish there was a way to actually be able to put it back in the box. But either way, though, let's get a closer look at Billy. Billy is hard plastic, and looking at him, he really reminds me of the older days of cult classic collecting. In fact, we did get ourselves, not a Billy, but we did get ourselves John Kramer. We got 2 versions of the pig mask, and then we got John Kramer with a hood and John Kramer unhooded. I sort of kind of get that same vibe here when we get Billy the Puppet. Billy the Puppet was also an included accessory with all of those John Kramer Saw figures. So we kind of get like a larger version of this from NECA. What's, though, different with this release, not something that would have been found with the original one, is that there's an audio clip. First of all, you have an on and off switch. Switching it to on will then cycle through about 5 phrases by pressing the button here located on the back. By not pressing it in, pressing the button, you can do it until the cows come home. It's not going to be omitting anything. The battery compartment located here on the side, I believe, take LR44 batteries. Those batteries, luckily, are already installed, so you don't have to worry about buying batteries the first time you get Billy home. There's a speaker box located here on the back that will be omitting sound. And if you think to yourself, well, I'm going to have Billy facing this way the whole time, no, you don't. The sound is quite loud. Spinning, though, Billy around, he's made of really hard plastic. He has articulation points in the shoulders, in the hands. Well, again, we'll talk more about that in a moment. Getting a closer look at the head sculpt. Overall, I'm very happy with how this one turned out. Depending on what saw you see, sometimes Billy does change his look. I think proportionately, his head is a little bit too small for the frame of his body. Generally, when I think of Billy, I think of a smaller framed body with a much larger head than what we actually get right here. But still, I'm very happy with how this one turned out. I am a bit bummed, unfortunately, though, that the mouth doesn't open and close. There almost is a tease. There's an outline here where you'd be able to look as if you'd be able to move his mouth, but it's not the case at all. I really wish that they could have found a way to incorporate mouth articulation, but it still checks the rest of the boxes off for what Billy would normally have been. Long hair here in the back, not rooted hair this time around, but plastic hair, which I think is fine for a figure like this. He's got the very large red eyes with a center pupil of black and the familiar indications of the spirals that he has on his cheek. It looks very much like Billy. Whether I feel like the head is maybe too small, I think the head is still really handled well here. He has the crooked tie. He has a 3-piece suit. So he's got the jacket here on the front in black, a vest in the middle with black, and then of course he's got the white tie under it, white shirt and red tie underneath that. He does have articulation, but again, it's going to be a little bit more limited, but we'll talk more about that in a moment. A little handkerchief there on the side and large white Mickey Mouse gloves that he has to hold on to the bike handles of the bike. Now, when looking at the figure, I did mention earlier that he didn't really have the means to stand on his own. I mean, you can somewhat getting this stand, but the way that he's actually posed, one of his legs, I don't know if you can see, is a little bit shorter than the other, and it's just by the way they've actually sculpted it. So even if you could straighten out the legs, which in theory you could, he doesn't really have the means to stand on his own. It's always going to be kind of the case where this one leg is going to be bent than the other, unless you have him resting against something, like maybe resting like a block or something underneath his one foot. He really wouldn't have, unfortunately, the means to stand on his own. For the figure's articulation, before we actually get down to the audio clips, Billy's head does rotate back and forth. It seems to be on a ball joint. And really where, again, I feel this guy reminds me of the old cult classic days is sort of the limitations for his articulation. So yeah, his head rotates back and forth. It only looks up by just a little bit. I know for a second you may have missed it. It looks up that far, and it looks down that far. More so, it's only just to rotate it back and forth. That's all it really accomplishes. The arms rotate all the way around, and that's the same also on both sides. And you can also hinge the arms outward, very much like the old cult classic days. He doesn't have elbow articulation, but he still manages to pull off wrist articulation. You can rotate that also all the way around. Billy has no waist articulation, but you can split the legs out slightly. You can bring him forward, bring him back, and he has just, again, a swivel cut in his ankles, or a swivel cut in his knees, and also a little bit of articulation in the feet. Speaking of feet, though, I didn't get the chance to really show you guys the ruby slippers. They're not even so much ruby slippers, ruby shoes. Judy Garland, get jealous. But you can see the way they've actually sculpted the laces and paint them nicely in black, and I love the glittery red that they've used here. The figure doesn't have any peg holes on the undersides of his feet, not that he really would have had the means to stand on his own anyways. Okay, so let's talk a little bit of his audio clips. And again, in order to do that, you're going to have to depress this button in, because without that, you could just keep pressing it all afternoon and accomplishing squat. To press this in, though, it cycles through 5 or 6 phrases, with one of them actually being Billy the Puppet's giggling, which is something I really wish that the figure could have had, and luckily it does. It doesn't have, unfortunately, the ringing of the tricycle bell, but it has, I think, everything else it really would need. So once that button is pressed in, I'm going to spin this around. You can still see, and more importantly hear, how loud those audio clips will be. Just to press the button right now. Now, again, I didn't even have to rotate this around. I mean, it's more than loud enough that even with the figure facing forward, you easily can make out the voice of John Kramer. I will say one thing about the audio clip. It does sort of have a tingy, almost hollowy sound to it. But if you really think about where the source material is being pulled from in the first place, a lot of times when these trap videotapes are being played, usually the prisoners are being contained inside of a small echoey room, which makes sense then that you're not going to have a very clear audio clip in the first place. Pressing it again. Again, I only had wished that the figure could have had some mouth articulation, because that would have gone rather nicely with all the audio clip that they managed to pack into the figure. And again, there might be a couple more. Let's just press it again.
Congratulations, you are still alive.
And I believe there's one more then. And then, of course, is the audio clip of Billy giggling himself. One question, in case you guys did have, if you wanted to ask it, could you interrupt the audio?
So are you going to watch yourself die today or do something about it?
The answer is no. Once the audio clip stops, once it starts, you have to let it run its course before it actually will turn off. You can't interrupt it by pressing the button again to cycle through then the next audio clip. The last thing we'll do, of course, is to take Billy, and we're just going to fit him on top of his tricycle. We're just going to make sure we want to bring his gloves around, because, of course, those are going to be fitting onto the handles themselves. I find it's actually easier to contend with the handles first. Once you get Billy's hands in place, everything else sort of then falls into place when it comes to displaying the figure. You may also want to do one thing that I have yet to do, is actually just bring his legs a little bit further forward. There we go. And then just get him onto his seat. But again, like, the biggest thing is just to get him onto the handlebars. Once you get one in place, the one after that is a lot easier to do. Just fit that in place, and then you got Billy on top of his tricycle. Now, I did say earlier, when it comes to attaching him onto the bike, you're not even so much attaching him, you're just resting him onto the seat. And unfortunately, with the condition that he is, or in the pose that they've placed him, he manages to get at least his foot on one pedal, but he can't get it on the other. And I tried to bring his foot forward, and obviously the pedal can't swing back. Don't do that, whatever you do. So unfortunately, he only has the means, I've noticed, to attach onto one pedal. Going back to a point I did mention earlier when we started looking at the tricycle, is just the fact that when it comes to, I'm just going to have to just fixing my lights. Anyways, what I was saying, though, is once you do get Billy on top of his tricycle, you'll notice it does weeble back and forth just a little bit. It's not the most stable way of holding the figure, with most of the plastic being obviously occupied with Billy's body and less with the tricycle itself. He really doesn't have, again, like, you can move him easily with, again, the working tires on the front and on the back. But with moving him back and forth, you can kind of see how a little bit of the tricycle does wiggle. Something I think that could have easily been fixed by including, like, even just like a little narrow canal inside of a clear plastic block, essentially. You could have had the tire fitting inside of that. And I think it would have had a little more stability to the figure. Other than that, though, it's a nice looking version of Billy. I'm glad to see we actually have our larger version of Billy rather than the smaller ones that usually accompany John Kramer when we got those original cult classics. This one turned out really nice. The audio clips work quite well too. They're a little on the more hollowy side. But again, like, if you base it from where the audio clips normally would have been played in the movie, they normally would have been played by people contained inside of a room against their will. So that makes more sense. I feel like the audio clips shouldn't have been clear, but rather echoey instead. Now, if you'd like to get your hands on Billy the Puppet before John Kramer gets his hands on you, Billy and Tricycle is available as of right now in stores or online, with the price point of this guy being about $120. And before some may say that's a bit too high for a figure and a tricycle, just keep in mind when NECA have done mega-sized figures in the past, they generally have been $100 plus. So I think for a figure of the size of Billy, not to mention the fact that the figure also includes audio clips, 6 I think I counted, I think it's justified the fact that this figure goes for around $119, $120 online. I did mention earlier, I may have even mentioned in this review, I do hope that this is the start of more Saw figures. And sure enough, just checking online, not only is there a bobblehead of Billy, but there's also going to be, in September, I believe, of this year, we are also going to be getting the Pig Mask Jigsaw Killer, along with Billy the Puppet on Tricycle. And like I said, I think that's coming out in September. So it is a good time to be a Saw fan. Whether Jigsaw himself, John Kramer himself, have been tampering around with the studio, I swear I never have had any problems with that light source above me in the past. Sure enough, I start doing a review about Jigsaw and I start getting problems with lights. I'm going to definitely have to get that fixed. I'm looking over at producer Tony to see if he's going to get that looked into. Judging by the fact that producer Tony is fast asleep right now, I think it's going to be left in my hands. I'm going to have to see if I can learn a little bit about electrical work. In the meantime, though, let me know in the comment section down below, is this a figure you could see yourselves picking up? Are you a big fan of the Saw franchise? And if you are, what's your favorite Saw movies of all the sequels, of the many sequels that we've gotten? We actually are getting a new Saw movie, I think, coming up either this year or next year. More Saw movies. Some would say, oh, sigh, do we need more? Apparently we do. But what's your favorite Saw movie? If you are liking the franchise, let me know down below in the comments section. And as well, if you guys enjoyed this video, hit with a like. If you guys are loving the content you guys are seeing and certainly do want to stick around for more. What's that sound? I'm getting paranoid. I started having flickering lights, and now all of a sudden I'm hearing noises. I'm just going to have to abandon this entire studio. There's definitely more things coming your way, guys. So as always, thanks for watching. See you guys next time.